Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Fatema and I'm a psychology careers coach here to help you guys find the best psychology career for you and to make sure that it aligns with you and your values in life. In terms of today's video, we are going to be looking at specific mental health and non-mental health roles that you can actually go into and to increase your understanding of how to get there. A lot of these roles are roles that you hear about often, for example, becoming a psychologist or a psychotherapist, but some of these terminologies can be very confusing, and I guess today we're just going to clarify some of those particular things so that it's really easy for you to understand kind of what kinds of things are available for you to go into within psychology and what you would need to do in terms of the basics in order to get there. So without making this intro super long-winded, I'm just going to get straight into it because I think a lot of the things that I'm going to explain in today's video will help you a lot to kind of think about what kind of career it is that you really want for yourself. So let's get into it. So the first role that you can get into in psychology careers is the typical route of becoming a psychologist. A psychologist is someone that has in-depth training to become a doctorate in psychology, to be able to then practice with different theories and approaches to help people to understand and manage their mental health. The difference between, say, for example, other mental health practitioners and a psychologist is that a psychologist is at the top end of the spectrum in the sense where they are assessed with all different kind of approaches to make sure that they are suitable to work with patients in different kinds of ways. Now, the difference between psychologists and other roles is that they have a scientific idea of how to approach mental health. And that might mean that they look into areas of the medical model to help them understand either psychotropic medication, but also to understand some of the scientific interventions backed by theory that can really help someone to manage their mental health. Although they are not psychiatrists who are in charge of administering psychotropic medication, psychologists work very closely with psychiatrists to make sure that they are getting a well-rounded care approach to ensure that the patient's needs are being met fully. It might be that a psychologist also works with different parts of an MDT, for example, social workers, care coordinators, nursing staff, support workers, care assistants, and other people from local services in the area that they work in to really support someone with their care pathway. Becoming a psychologist requires lots of years of training in terms of getting a BSc psychology degree, making sure that it's BPS accredited, maybe doing a master's, and then moving into the doctorate training after you've gained a significant amount of experience. But after the 3 years that you've completed as a doctorate, you do get the title of a psychologist under an accredited HCPC accreditation. You can get different kinds of psychologists, for example, clinical psychologists, forensic psychologists, counselling psychologists, educational psychologists, occupational psychologists, health psychologists, and even sports psychologists. The next kind of role that you can get within psychology is something that is called a psychotherapist. A psychotherapist is someone that has training in a particular area where they have studied a specific approach and now use that approach to work with particular types of patients to really support them. The difference between a psychologist and like a psychotherapist can be that a psychologist is like a jack of all trades. They have training in lots of different areas because of the different modules that they may do whilst on their training. However, a psychotherapist may only have one particular area that they have done their training in. For example, if a psychologist is a jack of all trades, then a psychotherapist might be a master of one trade. There are different kinds of psychotherapies out there, for example, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, IPT, interpersonal therapy, ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, and so on. However, if you are a psychotherapist, it's typically that you have kind of one area where you have your core profession, and then you may do other kinds of training on top of that to add on to that. The difference between a psychotherapist and a psychologist is that a psychologist would have already dipped their toes into the different kinds of approaches depending on kind of what it is that they want to do as part of their modules whilst on their training. So for example, a CBT practitioner can be a psychotherapist, but a psychologist can be a psychologist with CBT training or kind of modules that they cover in CBT already completed on their training. It's important to note that the term psychotherapist can be very difficult to understand in some cases because it can be something that doesn't really give a really good understanding of what a person actually does, because psychotherapy is a very broad term. So it really depends on the kind of approach that they've taken. Now, if a person has taken like a psychotherapy and then is also a counsellor, then you might get someone that is called a counselling psychotherapist, because they have training and education in counselling, but also have experience and training within a psychotherapy like CBT. So for example, that might be a person that's called a counselling psychotherapist. So this is why it's really important to know like the kind of area that you want to go into when you are looking at certain psychotherapies, because that is what your core profession will be. After you've done your core profession, you can then do CPDs in other specific areas where you do a couple of weeks of training or a year's training in a different area to add on to your core training, which makes you a more kind of well-rounded psychotherapist with different kinds of approaches under your belt. Another kind of role that you may see coming up in your searches when you're looking at particular psychology roles is something that's called a psychodynamic therapist. A psychodynamic therapist looks at a person's beliefs, thoughts and emotions and looks at how they can gain a better understanding and insight of themselves. It focuses more on what they are experiencing and feeling and what their beliefs are, and perhaps even looking at some of the unconscious patterns that they might have that might lead them to have the thoughts that they have about themselves. So to explore that, they might use different tools and techniques as part of their psychodynamic approach to help a person gain a better insight of themselves. And this looks at the human functioning of a person's interaction of drives and forces in relation to their personality and the way that it's structured. Particularly looking at the unconscious styles and how their personality might have different structures which cause them to act the way that they do or to be the way that they are. Completing the training for psychodynamic therapy can also take as long as becoming a psychologist. The reason being is that you usually have to do some kind of certification in which you kind of get an introduction into the actual approach to know that it's right for you and to gauge whether you're the right person to actually complete the approach with others. And then you go on to applying for the actual 3 years master's course and in-depth training that you have to do to become a psychodynamic therapist. Another therapy that you do come to know about is something called the psychoanalytical therapy, where actually psychodynamic therapy came from. Different to psychodynamic therapy, where it might be short-term sessions and what might be influencing the here and now, psychoanalytical therapy looks more at unconscious and the difficult childhood and historic patterns that have occurred to cause someone to behave or to deal with certain situations that have already happened. This doesn't focus so much on the future, although future can be an element in any kind of therapy of looking at how one can better themselves and improve themselves for the future. But psychodynamic and psychoanalytical therapy can focus more on the kinds of thoughts of the past and really looking at how a person may have come up with certain behaviours or acted out in certain ways because of things that have happened and the way that their personality has been structured as a result of those particular things. The other difference between psychodynamic and psychoanalytical therapy is that psychoanalytical therapy requires a long-term commitment to therapy. It's not something that is short-term, and it's something that you have to be committed to for I think at least 2 years. In order to become a psychoanalytical therapist, you will need to complete your BSc psychology degree, then obviously a master's in a related field, and then to complete the 3 or 4 years of training in order to become a psychoanalytical therapist. The 3 or 4 years that you do to become a psychoanalytical therapist will have to be a course that is approved by the Institute of Psychoanalysis and the British Psychoanalytical Association. The next role that you might see a lot of people talking about is the term counsellor. Now, just like psychotherapist, the term counsellor is very broadly used for lots of different kinds of practitioners. Now, becoming a counsellor can be as easy as just having life experience and going on to counsel people with their experiences of life, or it could be that you go through intensive, vigorous training to actually become something like a counselling psychologist or a counsellor with a lot of different training and approaches under their belt. So the term counsellor really has to be used loosely and even searched for carefully if you're looking to work with a counsellor, because not every counsellor has the accreditation training that is required to become an accredited counsellor. In the UK, a lot of people do become counsellors just by life experience and by choice of career change. However, not all counsellors have the training necessary in order to be a fully fledged trained counsellor. In the UK, coaching and counselling is very unregulated, where people can just kind of decide to have a career change and show up on the internet saying that they are counsellors and coaches even without any kind of training. So you really have to be careful that when you are doing your training and qualifications in counselling and in coaching, for example, that you are making sure that you are accredited by the UkCP, at least for counselling. Coaching is different. Again, in order to become a counsellor, you might start off with a BSc psychology degree with a counselling module, and then you might go into a certification where you get your first level of foundational knowledge around counselling. You then go into another 3 or 4 years of education and training where you gain the counselling accreditation with an accredited training program. Training programs for becoming a counsellor can be found on the UkCP website, where they give you an in-depth idea about how you can go and become a counsellor. But again, it takes a number of years in order to get there, and it's not something where you can just do a year of counselling and then hope that that will allow you to work with people on an accredited basis. 2 different accreditation bodies to do your counselling training in are the UkCP and the BACP. I also wanted to talk about some of the unconventional therapy roles out there that you can actually get into, and some of them are now available to work in within the NHS. Some of the roles that might come up in the NHS but you again don't hear much about are, for example, art therapists, drama therapists, even dance and movement therapists. Now, it might be that these therapists don't actually have training in just these areas. It's usually that they've got that core profession where they're either trained in some kind of psychotherapy training to get that accreditation, and then a year of art training, a year of drama training, a year of dance training to add on to their kind of core training. And that allows them to work in those specialist areas with their core training, but also having more of a knowledge of how to use art, drama, music even, and dance therapy approaches to really help someone kind of express themselves and find some kind of relief from the difficulties that they're facing. This is a wonderful kind of way of building a career for yourself, because a lot of people also go into kind of fields like physical health, where they become yoga therapists and they really use movement and the body to really help alleviate stress and traumatic experiences. A lot of the times we work with the medical model and very kind of traditional approaches at giving interventions to patients, where we're only looking at thoughts, feelings and behaviours, when actually there are some approaches out there that don't typically focus on those traditional approaches and really look at other kinds of approaches that really help patients. So it's really important for you to ascertain like what area of interest you really have and that you want to explore more of, so that you're able to kind of specialise in that area and really build a career for yourself. Again, some of these roles would be available within the NHS. For example, art therapy and drama therapy are 2 that I know that are definitely available. However, things like yoga therapist or dance and movement therapy might not be seen within organisational NHS government services. They might be kind of more private based and more kind of niche to specific populations and areas where they have a demand for that kind of thing. Another role that you might want to go into is the area of research within psychology, or even out of psychology, but psychology may have led you to kind of exploring different areas of research, which then you kind of go into a specialist area within like education or within corporate jobs to really use the skills that you've gained. Now, becoming a researcher can be in numerous different ways. For example, you can do an undergraduate degree and then maybe a master's in research, which can then allow you to work as a researcher under like a supervisor, or you can go on to become like a research psychologist, for example, doing your doctorate training and then specializing in the research area. Now, other ways to become a researcher may be that you become a PhD student, so you don't really look at going down the psychologist route where you're going to be working with patients, but more a kind of PhD research route where you are looking at different kinds of theoretical approaches, different kinds of hypotheses, and really looking at the ways that you can test out these hypotheses to really come to a conclusion of your own. It might be that as a researcher that you are very much about building something new or coming up with a new kind of approach, and you have done significant kind of exploration and you have a significant amount of knowledge and understanding as to why that is adequate for, you know, whatever it is that you want to treat or support people with. And you have a significant amount of knowledge and interest within that particular area. So rather than working on the front line with patients, you actually want to work more behind the scenes of developing those theoretical approaches and the kinds of different ways of working with people that you can then publish and allow other people to absorb and train in, so then they can actually take on that learning themselves. In terms of research, it can be a very very lengthy process, because obviously coming up with theories, ideologies, and really testing them year after year after year can take a long time. So research isn't something perhaps that people go into if they just want to like have a couple of years of exploring and then kind of go into something else. It's typically for people who really want to absorb themselves in theoretical work and really come up with new ideas and ideologies that other people can use as part of their therapies and interventions. So now we're going to talk about some of the non-mental health related roles which you might want to get into if you are looking to kind of still do something with your psychology degree. A lot of the times people go into IT and digital jobs where they work in the media or with advertising to help companies really understand the psychology of people so that they're able to appeal to them in the best way. This is typically referred to as advertising or marketing psychology, where they use kind of an understanding of how humans retain and absorb information as a way to really understand how they can help businesses to flourish and really get their message out there. For example, if you see a lot of adverts or marketing platforms out there where they are running ads or campaigns to really show up on an algorithm and in front of you when you are scouring the internet for like your best dress, you might see lots of pop-ups come up. And these are the kinds of things that people might working in terms of IT and digital to really get a really great understanding of how to appeal and show up in the algorithm in the right way. In terms of these kinds of roles, it's not just that you can do a BSc psychology degree and move into these roles. Some of them you can, where you are able to be an assistant or a helper or someone that works in a team. However, if you want to kind of obtain some of those senior kind of roles within digital or IT, you would have to do a master's or additional top-up training to be able to get an understanding of how the digital world works and how psychology informs the digital world and helps it to function. Other roles that you can also go into are more corporate related jobs where lots of psychology students actually end up. For example, you get a lot of human resources roles and roles in communication where you are actively looking at ways to increase the morale or the kind of teamwork or the way that the business functions, because you want to be able to support the staff members that work there. Human resources is an area where, you know, teams come together, where they look at what the business is struggling with and how the staff can be better supported to be able to help that business flourish and also the staff flourish. It might be that you're also in charge of developing the right training and materials necessary for your staff and employees to undertake in order to again develop themselves and also to benefit the business that they are working for. These kinds of roles can be available in both public and private sectors, where a lot of your skills from your psychology degree are going to be hugely transferable into those particular roles. The only thing about these kinds of corporate roles is that it's a very much a 9-to-5 kind of a life, which is very different to perhaps working in some of the healthcare worker roles where you can work more shifts and have a bit more flexibility with how you work. Another area that you might go into might be, for example, business management, where you use a lot of your research skills and psychological skills to really analyze and handle the data around how a business functions. So you might look at the different layers of the business development to really understand how you can use research to really inform the way that your business moves forward. Again, it's not that you can just use a psychology degree to go into these roles. You do have to obtain other kind of managerial and business qualifications in order to move into those kinds of roles. Finally, I just want to end off with a couple of different more roles which are known as sister roles of psychology, as I like to call them, because they are very closely linked to psychology, but you do have to do an undergraduate within those particular areas in order to work as those particular practitioners. And the reason why I say this is because a lot of people do complete their BSc psychology degree and then find that actually they have different interests with some of their kind of sister fields. Some of these sister fields might be, for example, nursing in mental health, social working, occupational therapy, or even midwifery. All of these roles can be done in their particular kind of fields, where if you completed a mental health nursing degree for 3 years, you would become qualified. If you completed a social worker degree for about 2 or 3 years, you would become qualified. If you completed a midwifery degree for 3 years, you would become qualified. If you completed an occupational degree for 3 years, you would become qualified. Some of these sister fields are really, really helpful to know about because they can really really shift your perspective whether kind of you want to continue to do a BSc psychology degree, or whether you want to, especially if you've not started university yet, if you want to change it up into something else where you will have that qualification at the end of that degree. The reason why I mention these roles is because I know a lot of social workers, mental health nurses, occupational therapists and midwives that have gone on to enter the psychology world after they have completed their qualifications. And I think when you're looking at a career in psychology, it's not just about doing the training and becoming a practitioner. You really have to think about your life factors that might influence the way that you train. For example, if you've got a family, if you've got financial commitments, if you've got mortgages, if you've got things going on around you which makes you time limited, then these are the kinds of things that you really want to think about. So a lot of people end up doing a qualification in some of these sister fields to get their qualifications, and then a couple of years after they will do a top-up like psychotherapy training. For example, they become CBT therapists or IPT therapists, or they go on to enter the doctorate. So a lot of the times you can really shift things around, and I think that a lot of people only feel that they can get into some of the topper end psychology roles because they haven't done a psychology based degree. And yes, that might be true, but there are swings and roundabouts that you can go about that can help you to obtain the roles that you want. A lot of the times people feel like there are no other ways of entering the psychology world unless you do the BSc psychology degree, and that's not necessarily true. Yes, if you want to go on to doing the doctorate, it's likely that you're going to have to do the conversion masters in psychology, or you will have to do a BPS accredited psychology degree. However, if you just want to go into some of the psychotherapy roles or the therapy roles where you're doing kind of a top up of like 3 years master's course or something like that, then you don't have to have a BPS psychology degree. Still work with the degree that you have because it's health related. Even some of you that come from non-health related backgrounds, it's not that you have to have a psychology or health related degree. Sometimes it's enough to just have a degree and then complete the training in the psychology kind of senior roles that you want to go into. The final area that I want to talk to you about that is very closely linked to psychology is the coaching and mentoring field. Coaching and mentoring is completely different to the way that people apply therapy. For example, the best way that I've heard about it is that if you think about a scale where you've got -1, 0, +1, what a therapist does is help someone get from -1 to 0, and what a coach does is help someone get from 0 to +1. So coaching isn't necessarily for someone who's got deep-rooted trauma or difficulties with their mental health. It might be for someone who has an idea about what they want to do but has kind of low levels of mental health or a lot of kind of like physical barriers around them, where if they work to shift their perspective with a coach, that can really help them to stay accountable and to really reach their goals. But a lot of the times you do get therapy that apply a lot of kind of practical coaching principles because it really works, and no really right or wrong way about it. There are people in the coaching field that are very experienced and do work with very complex kind of mental health disorders, and they feel safe to do so. But it's always up to the individual and the way that you kind of work with people to make sure that you are being ethical and making sure that you're getting the support that you need to be able to fulfill the needs of the patients as well that you work with. Now, the difference between coaching and mentoring is that coaching is very much like you exploring ideas with the client. So you would very much kind of guide the client through different ways of looking at certain things and asking them coaching questions to help them to kind of get to a solution or to understand how they can go about a certain thing that they want to achieve. Whereas mentoring is where you are intentionally sharing information that you know that can help them to get ahead. So for example, mentorship is giving advice and information, but also allowing them to be coached and find their own way. And coaching is really allowing the person to just find their own way through really powerful, impactful coaching questions. Another area which kind of gives a bit more perspective as to the difference of coaching and mentoring is consultancy. Consultancy is like, for example, going to a doctor where they just tell you what to do. They're not asking for your advice or what you think about it so much. They're just kind of telling you like, this is what you need to do, this is the medication that you need to take, this is the intervention that you need to do, and this is how it's going to help. So it's real consulting where you are telling someone exactly what to do. However, obviously not all doctors are like that. Obviously there's going to be, work where they're exploring kind of options collaboratively with patients. but that is the difference in terms of like coaching, mentoring and consultancy. So that brings us to the end of our very long video about psychology roles. I hope you guys found it helpful. If you've got any kind of questions in relation to anything that I've talked about today, all you have to do is leave me a comment in the comment section below. All the details of how you can get in touch with me can be found in the description box below. And if you found this video helpful, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so that you are able to keep on top of every single video that I release, and you can watch it and we can create a supportive community, because I love that kind of thing. If you are feeling confused about how to go about your psychology career and need more one-to-one in-depth support, please feel free to message me on Instagram or to hit me up in my emails, where we might be able to discuss creating a career plan specifically for you. So I hope you guys found this helpful. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Have a lovely day. Bye!